Hello. We're going to start this live stream here shortly, but while we're waiting for everybody to join in, wanted to quickly talk about another event we're having. I know you're just logged into this event, and we're already telling you about the next event, but our microservices March kicking off here, March 8th. So while you're waiting for everybody to join, if you just want to go to the link in there, you can register for some really great learning on microservices and what Nginx is doing with them. So there'll be 4 2-hour series, one every Wednesday on between March 8th and the 31st. And there'll be an hour of overview instruction and then an hour of hands-on lab, which if you're anything like me, the hands-on lab is completely worth it. So yeah, have a look at that. We'll just wait a minute or two to see everybody gets a chance to work out their technical issues, see all the video and that, and then we'll get started. Great clockwork too. I don't know if anybody can hear the kookaburras going in the background, but there must be 20 of them just all heckling. Can you hear that?
Yeah.
All right. Really authentic Australian sound. Cool. All right. Well, we're 2 minutes past, and it will be recorded. So if anybody's had any struggles getting on, did you get a chance to go forward? So we'll go ahead and get started. So today we're here to chat about our API Autopsies series, a redo of our API Autopsies series on architecture. So this is the first episode. We have done an API Autopsies show code series about 2 years ago. So hopefully this format looks similar, but we did decided it was time for a bit of a refresh. I'm Mike Holland. I'm a solutions engineer for Nginx based out of Sydney, Australia. I focus primarily on our Australian and New Zealand customers and focus mainly on modern apps type deployments using Nginx solutions. And today I'm joined by...
Hey everyone, my name is Veena Rajaratna. I'm a senior product manager at F5 Nginx based out of San Francisco, California. I take care of Nginx API Connectivity Manager, which is our API management offering. I've been with Nginx for over 5 years now, and I have seen this product evolve, and along with the API management market. I get to interact a lot with our customers who are either, rolling out an API program, or they have inherited an API management tool, and either it's too complex to operate, or it's expensive, or in some ways it does not meet their current needs. Right. So I get to hear their pain points, their feedback, and along with which is great. Hearing from customers is always great. I have to hear to all of Mike's questions here as well, right? So, and he asks a lot of questions.
I thought you liked my questions. I thought that was the highlight of your day, was my 4,000 questions every meeting we have. I'm shocked, Veena.
Sorry to disappoint you, Mike, but yeah.
Ooh, it's gonna be a rough webinar.
I do have one question. Before we start the webinar, it's an interesting choice of name. Just want to, so if you can assure us and the viewers that there were no APIs that were harmed in the making of this series.
Well, I don't think I didn't come up with the name API Autopsies, but I think it really goes into so no, we didn't harm any APIs, but we did take them apart to figure out what makes them tick. So but we put them right back together. Lots of anesthetic. So they should be fine. Should be good. Weren't harmed at all. Awesome.
Right.
All right. So some of you may remember our first API Autopsies live stream series about 2 years ago. We did take a look at that and decide, hey, maybe this is a great opportunity to refresh that content, right? So we went through, it's a 4-part series. So today is the first part where we cover architecture. We also are going to cover in future episodes some configuration, automation, and security. So look for those coming forward.
Yeah, we'll start with a few questions from Mike, and we'll later jump into talking about what we're doing here at Nginx with regards to API management. And as Mike suggested, we'll look at the customer insights, talk about the operating models, security considerations, etc. as we go through this presentation.
And then I'll finish up with a quick demo of what our new API solution offering is and management solution. Fantastic. So just also to add, just a bit of housekeeping, the comment section on the side there is a great place for Q&A. We do enjoy answering all your questions, and Veena really enjoys answering questions that I don't ask. So if you could, take a second, put a question in there. If you have anything that you'd like more detail on and information, we'll be happy to answer it towards the end of the stream. So with that in mind, let's jump into our first questions, right? So we're going to start with some customer insights, right, on API management. So Veena, as a part of our roles, we get to hear loads of great feedback from our customers, not only the technical successes, but also their technical challenges, sometimes failures. The growing pace of application deployments and updates has put the API front and center as the point of interaction between these applications. Maybe you could cover a few of the highlights around the API challenges you've heard about.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. Yes, as you said, APIs are everywhere, right? So they are not just operational anymore. They are the business, or they are the product, right? So we see an increase in the adoption of microservices compared to a new pattern emerging there. We see continuous CI/CD type of solutions, people wanting to develop software with CI/CD in mind. Also, they are developing apps for this cloud era, right? So under the hood, all these applications, are connected by APIs, or they are under the hood APIs connecting different microservices. So we see a lot of customers complaining about the sprawl, right? So the sprawl, having to manage this fast-growing APIs within an organization is a challenge for them operationally, and as well as security-wise, right? So they are really looking for a way to manage and control these API sprawl within their organization. That is one of the common themes we hear from customers, right? The second challenge we commonly hear is about balancing the agility and the governance, right? So the developers hate the word governance, but in today's modern, as the development has evolved, the teams are globally located and they are distributed, right? So they need some level of autonomy or some level of independence to bring their services to market quickly. So they are looking for having some control over managing the lifecycle of APIs, being more agile, and not being dependent on a central team to make it available for them, right? So the organizations want to support this agility, but at the same time, they have to establish certain guardrails. So these various different teams that may be located in different locations, they adhere to common practices and follow uniformity, and they are in compliance with the security and other standards that the organization has. So we see this common challenge that customers have between supporting the agility that they want the teams to adopt, as well as maintaining that level of insight and oversight across the organization. And the third common challenge we hear is about security, right? So security is kind of out in front again. Organizations are going through digital transformation. They're adopting these newer operating models, and the platform ops team is emerging. And these platform ops, they're responsible for maintaining their infrastructure and ensuring that it's reliable and secure, across all the different teams and across their infrastructure, and which includes the APIs under the hood, right? So they want to reduce these data breaches, but they want to do so without compromising, developer experience. They want to cater to their internal teams and bring about the security in an elegant manner without really affecting the developer experience. So these are some of the common challenges we hear from our customers.
Okay. So too many APIs, keeping them all consistent and securing them. Okay, that resonates. We hear that a lot as well. So just next question. So Nginx have recently had some product relaunches and rebuilds based on our customers' feedback that you mentioned. When we did the previous API Autopsies series, so the one 2 years ago, we focused the discussion around an older API management solution. Can you cover what challenges our customers were facing with the old API management solution and what we have done to address those challenges in our new offering? I'm guessing it's going to focus a bit around question one's customer feedback.
Yeah, sure, Mike. So we did, for those who are familiar, we did have a solution. It is adopted widely, and we did hear a lot of feedback from our customers who are operating it, right? So the foremost or the most common feedback we heard was that it was operationally, it was complex, right? And it did not lend itself well to easily extending the functionality to meet the needs, right? So it was a K8s based solution. So some of our customers are not that savvy, and operating that solution was complex for them. And that was one of the main feedbacks we heard from that, right? The second common issue customers ran into was the complexity around the most optimized workflow you can think of for an API management. So commonly, developers want an optimized workflow where they can quickly onboard their APIs, right? If it's like learning a language, if they cannot learn within a language quickly, they give up. So it's the same thing for a product. If they cannot understand how to use a product, then they pass that off, right? So in our previous solution, to onboard a simple Hello World API, it was complex that they had to call 7 to 8 different API calls, or in terms of GUI experience, they had to make about 60 to 65 clicks to get an API API onboarded onto the platform, right? So that kind of affected the developer experience. We had passed on the complexity to the customer to figure it out. It was flexible, but it was too flexible that they had to figure out some of those workflows stitched. They had to stitch it together. So that was kind of hard on our customers. The third point was around the terminology that we used within the product. So our previous solution was a solution that addressed many different use cases. So some of the terminology kind of did not resonate well with the APIM personas or the functional personas who would use the API management solutions, right? So there are vendors out there. It's not a new market. So there's already certain things that people are familiar with. And for them, the adoption became harder because they couldn't understand the terminology, all of that. Then the domain knowledge makes a difference. The most important feedback, or the most important thing, was when you think of Nginx, it has many different use cases. API gateway is one of them, right? But Nginx as a standalone probably checks off as 60 to 80% of the gateway use cases. But the moment we brought this controller in, we lost a lot of that functionality, mainly because, again, it was complex to extend it, to roll out new features. And we lost that ability to highlight Nginx's capabilities within the product. So that took a big hit, and we couldn't roll out features fast enough to support the API gateway use cases. So all of these challenges kind of led us to take a step back, rethink our approach, re-architect it, and we focused on two main things, right? What do API management users want? They want to manage the infrastructure side, right? The ones that run the APIs, like the API gateways, the developer portals, and optimize that workflow. And the second part of it, which is managing the life cycle of the APIs themselves, being able to give the API teams control over how they want to manage those APIs throughout its life cycle, how to onboard it, how to retire, all the way up to retiring, go through that life cycle. And we optimized for those workflows. And at the same time, the platform also has undergone a lot of changes where it's very simple. Getting the platform up and running is as simple as installing Nginx itself, apt-get install Nginx. So similar to that, the same approach was taken for making the platform easier to operate. And we focused on improving these aspects within. We had this as our redesign goals when we thought through the redesign of API solution.
Okay. I think, to me, it's always interesting to hear all the lessons learned after. I mean, you spend so much time in designing and developing, and then, a product comes out, and a few years later, it's always the hindsight of seeing what was missed, what we could do differently, what we can do better. Always impresses me. But on that note, long-term operation of the business's APIs is something we often overlook during the design phase of an API. And with API's fundamental digital businesses, we can see several issues creep into this day-to-day business as usual type work around APIs. Issues we often see include exposing API endpoints without protection, lack of monitoring or analytics, which can create support and performance issues. What steps would you include during the initial phases of API design to ensure these challenges are included into an API management operating model? So all those great lessons learned, from our previous products should definitely come into things we can do during the design phase of our API sprawl.
Great question, Mike. Yeah, it's true that developers are not really thinking about the operational challenges, right? So as they are going through this exercise of developing their services and exposing it as APIs, they're optimizing for certain things, and they don't think how much information they're exposing, right? So data exposure, unnecessary data exposure through the API is one of the challenges, right? They don't think about it. That's something that they need to keep in mind as they go through the design phase, where only exposing just enough data, what's needed. Second point that you don't consider is who, when it comes to authentication and authorization, how not having enough access management around who has access to APIs. Operators often complain that some of the APIs they didn't even know got exposed, and they were released to production without proper security measures or any authentication around it. So that's a common thing we hear. Developers, again, not thinking through about securing or protecting their backend API runtimes, right, with things like things that could bring down their services. So without some form of request limiting or throttling at the front, you're really exposing your API services, for attacks. One often commonly overlooked thing is the API documentation, right? So developers, again, hate documentation, and without proper tooling, it's harder to get the documentation delivered along with the APIs. So the documentation is always lacking. And without proper documentation, right? So instead of reusing the APIs, most often, the digital assets get recreated. And we have heard where customers have had like 10 different customer APIs, or, they didn't know, the teams didn't know that it already existed. So documentation is very important, again, to the overall adoption of the API. And the visibility part, right? You're not really thinking about the full life cycle of this API as it goes through this life cycle. What are the metrics you want to collect at different stages? How you can enable troubleshooting and easily making those metrics-driven decisions, whether to scale the API due to its performance, or retire an API. You want to collect metrics so you can make those informed decisions. And generally, this rolls up into the organizations not having enough data to know who owns certain APIs, right? In case of issues in the production, they want to track the API to a team. They want to build that, the visibility across the organization, so they know who they should, which team they should reach out to in case of issues to troubleshoot, things like that. So all these decisions need to be thought through as they are, going through the life cycle. And with these pain points, we want the API management tool to handle this right through from the beginning throughout the life cycle. And so the developers can focus on developing the APIs and or on the business function, and rely on the management tool kind of to enforce all these as policies, so they can, there's uniformity across different teams, and they're sticking to these enterprise-wide policies, and there's less scope for error. And also it's operationally, as the businesses will evolve, the technology will evolve, and having it managed through a management tool that makes it easier to enforce this policy change or enforce. Today, they may be using API key as an authentication. They may want to adopt a robust scheme such as OAuth 2 or token-based, right? So enforcing this from a management tool, so it's uniform across all the teams, and all the teams are adhering to this kind of policy, makes it easier. So you want the API management tool to do some of the heavy lifting.
Okay. Wow, this is an excellent point. So I would say that, the API data exposure is one, often not thought about. We've had a few recent large breaches in Australia that have made quite a bit of the news. And I think often overlooked, as you stated, the type of data that's going to be involved in the API and where it's going, who has access to it. I mean, all of these, the authentication, the API security, all play into that. And oftentimes we allow, third parties or even the public to access these APIs and don't give any consideration of what details are being provided. So that's definitely, the visibility, being able to see it, the catalogs, being able to see what type of APIs have already been deployed. Really good points. Excellent. So cool. So let's just jump to the next question then. I think we're doing really well on time. All right. So using a real-time API reference architecture, we would normally see 6 different entities deployed by customers, such as API gateway, API policy server, API developer portal, also known as a dev portal, API security service, an API identity service, and some DevOps tooling to bring it all together. Could you briefly provide an example of each and the benefits we see by deploying the 6 different entities in a standard API management type deployment?
Great question, Mike. Yeah. So you can think of API management as a suite of products, right? It's not a single product. It is a suite of products with, the heart of it being the API gateway. So now you might notice that the API gateway pattern is a lot of teams are adopting, or there is an increase in how they want to adopt this API gateway pattern, because the way the teams are developing, right? So they want to keep their applications light. So they don't want each of their applications to worry about authentication. They want to abstract all that out to a gateway, similar to the functions such as rate limiting or request throttling. They want the gateway to handle that, so their applications are light. They're just focused on the business side and focus on the business function. So this gateway pattern is becoming a common usage, right? So you want that gateway, which is the workhorse in this setup, to be as light as possible, as performant as possible, right? So as you are very well aware, Mike, Nginx as an API gateway is one of the fastest growing use cases, right? And our survey indicates that about over 45% of the deployments are as an API gateway. So there's testament to that it's becoming a common pattern.
Well, it's so good, in fact, that a lot of our competitors use Nginx open source in their solutions as well. So yeah, definitely a very good use case.
Yeah, absolutely. And for folks who have already used Nginx, you know how reliable, how flexible, and how performant it is. At the same time, the low memory footprint it has. So you want something that small and that reliable to be your workhorse, enforcing these policies, doing the traffic routing, etc. The second component that you mentioned, which is the policy server, or I call it the management suite, management plane, management server, is you don't want your API, your lifecycle traffic. You want to decouple those things from your API traffic, right? So your workhorse is there out there doing the routing, the policy enforcement, etc. And anything that you want, the lifecycle management of those APIs, you don't want the request to go through this management plane. You don't want all those, you want to decouple these actions. So we, and at the same time, we want to enable, the organizations want to enable these teams that are developing different APIs and different services to own their APIs, to own the lifecycle of their APIs, right? So the management solution should offer some kind of a logical separation between these teams, so they're not stepping on each other, and they're able to provide quality of service on their APIs, right? So one team may need caching, and another team may think of something else. They may need course policy, so they don't want to step on each other, and they want that autonomy to apply those different policies, and they need that separation, so they're not either waiting for someone else to finish, or they can operate at their speed. So you want your management, that's your management plane. The developer portal, that's another component. That's, if you can't that is for, if you think of APIs, there are two: there's a producer and there's a consumer, right? So the portal is for the consumers. So that is where you go to read about the APIs, to learn about how the API works. It has API documentation. And it's not just limited to documentation, right? It's sort of like a self-service portal. The developers can onboard themselves. They can request resource credentials without having to talk to anyone or involving anyone. It can be fully automated, and they can request credentials, manage, how to get access to those APIs. And so it's an important component, often overlooked, but the documentation and this credential management is an important part. And another thing that portal offers is without the developers having to write a single line of code, they can test those APIs, understand how it works, all of that on the portal. Another important component there in the API management suite. The fourth one, or the fifth one, I should say, is the security service, right? So as we talked about, security in so many different, you have to think about in layers, right? So for the API, how do you secure the APIs? How is it, who has access to it? And, how is it protected and things like that. So you want to give the ability for the teams to do precise routing. You don't want to expose unnecessary APIs, right? So you want precise or unnecessary endpoints. You want to do precise routing and reject every other traffic. You want control over limiting or throttling these requests, right? So you want to protect your backend services. When in production, you want the ability to quickly block some malicious. You may have other products to do this, but in a quick and effective way is to block traffic at the API gateway based on IP address or a malicious user. You want the ability to do that. You also want to limit exposing vulnerabilities in your backend services by standardizing on some error response formats, right? Sometimes it's often overlooked, but you don't want to expose everything that the backend throws back, but you want the gateway to be diligent enough that it exposes standard responses, and that way, it doesn't open itself up for attacks. Another one that the operations always asks for is, protecting putting a size on those request bodies, right? So you want to set limits so your services are protected, your infrastructure is protected from malicious requests that are too large or those that are trying to bring it down. And commonly, you want, again, along the same security measures, you don't want to expose, along with the APIs exposing the data, you don't want to expose unnecessary headers, or you don't want to expose the server itself, right? You want to block off server fingerprinting capabilities and things like that you don't want others to do it with. So think of all these different security aspects. And there's always that layer 7 security with WAF, right? So you want to consider when you think about API security, you should be thinking about all of these different measures. There's identity service in some solutions that is integrated, that is part of the solution, an API management solution. But most commonly what we hear from customers is they want to integrate, right? So they already have an identity and access management. They want to use that central identity and access management, and they're looking for integration with an API management as well, so they can secure the APIs, manage access, fine level access control by integrating with the IDP, and use things like OAuth2 or JOT tokens to for that fine level of access. DevOps tooling, very important again, right, for the adoption of the product as well. The developers, they want to automate everything, right? Even this experience or this onboarding of APIs, publishing of documentation, publishing policies, they want to automate or drive all of those changes from CI/CD. So they are looking for a declarative, they're looking at a declarative way of doing it. They want REST APIs, so they can drive all of this from, without having to use the graphical user interface. They want to drive it from CI/CD. So the product supporting that is very important as well.
Wow, Veena, that was a lot of information in 30 minutes. That was awesome. There's some really good points there. I'd love to give you a minute to breathe, drink some water, but I got another question here. I got heaps of questions. I'm ready to go. So my next question, you ready? Where does a thought go when it's forgotten? Go.
Seriously, Mike, I thought we were having a serious conversation here.
Very important question.
All right, it's now my turn to ask you questions. I think I do need a break. What are your thoughts on, you also hear from customers a lot. So does the challenges that we talked about earlier, do they resonate? Do you hear that from your the customers you talk to in your region? Is it common across the globe?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting to hear. You have a very global view. I really only hear from customers in Australia and New Zealand, sometimes in Asia Pacific. But a lot of the things you mentioned are really the first questions out of the gate when we meet with these customers. So I'll just touch on 4 things we often hear in this part of the world, but mainly RBAC. So we hear a lot of customers wanting to have, they have those dispersed API developer groups that you mentioned, and being able to use those fine-grained role-based access controls to make sure that each team has access to what they have responsibility for. So that's often, how does that integrate? How does it work? It's a question we field a lot from our customers. WAF security comes up quite often, but I really like all the other aspects of security that you mentioned just a second ago. So, I mean, security, like you said, I mean, it's a layered approach. It's not just the web application firewall for that layer 7 stuff, but you mentioned rate limiting, you mentioned access controls, you mentioned, proxy header requests and all that kind of great stuff. Is really important as well. But oftentimes we focus just on that layer 7 type security and that web application firewall. Rate limiting, oddly enough, I don't understand why it can be such a big ask, but a lot of customers always ask about rate limiting, and maybe that's contractual agreements they have with their users. Maybe it's a resource limitations on the back end. They want to keep their environments nice and small and performant. And so rate limiting is often asked. And we go into great detail with that leaky bucket algorithm and how it all works within Nginx, because it does work really, really well. And that, being an Nginx Plus specific feature has been really, really popular. The fourth one also that comes up quite often, and you touched on it a bit in the information you provided, is around persona challenges. And while we don't get customers that really come out and ask specifically about persona challenges, it's often inferred with the way they describe how they develop their environments today and deploy and manage their environments. And around persona challenges, they'll say, every business has that team that focuses on the infrastructure, that team that focuses on the security, that team that focuses on the development, and even just following up on those RBAC controls, having each of those teams being responsible for their specific areas of the business, right? They all have different concerns. They all have different, goals that they need to meet to show success and to show value to the business. And those persona challenges, often are a struggle within the business. So when you introduce an API management solution, having bounds around who can control the API gateway deployments, who controls the load balancer configuration, who controls the WAF policy, the rate limiting, who's responsible for changing those upstreams when new features and functionality are deployed by our API development teams. So yeah, those persona challenges are also really important. So yes, we definitely are hearing a lot of the same stuff in this part of the world as you hear globally, and it's great to hear that there is that similarities between the regions.
Great, thank you. So you mentioned WAF and rate limiting, right? So yeah, of course, rate limiting, one of the best. Right? Nginx is one of the best in there. Do you see a need for all of this to move closer to the application, or is it better at the edge? I mean, what do you see from your side of the conversations?
Definitely. Well, I mean, with that persona challenge, you always come into business and they always have that front door security, that front door load balancer, right? And F5's been a leader in that market, as long as I can remember. And that's something that businesses are comfortable with, right? They have all their security controls right there. But as you mentioned, the layered security has become more and more popular, right? So bringing those security controls closer to the application. So oftentimes we see customers taking their APIs and going on a digital transformation type journey where, today they run their APIs in one solid monolithic type application and moving towards adding functionality to those APIs by introducing things like microservices and containers. And oftentimes, our development teams will go through and say, okay, we need to add a new function to our APIs. They go pick the popular programming language at the moment or the popular framework, and they start developing, this new feature for their APIs. Well, when we take security and we shift left, I hate to use a buzz term, but I love the buzz term, and we move it closer to the application, this allows granular control. So we talked about those personas. You have an infrastructure team that's maintaining the front door. The security team maintains maybe some layer 3, layer 4 DDoS protection, maybe some IP controls. But as we get closer to the API, we have an opportunity there to tune WAF policies, very specific, to tune rate limiting policies specific to the API that's being developed. So an example of a microservice gets released, maybe it's in a different operating system. Maybe it's got different libraries it uses, different programming languages. A WAF policy can then be tailored for specific technology signature sets, right? So you reduce your chance of false positives for triggering a Python vulnerability when your backend app is programmed in Ruby or PHP or Rust, right? And that there can't be a Python vulnerability if the app's written in Rust. So being able to write those technology specific signature sets, but more so with Nginx and our WAF technology, Nginx App Protect, being able to deploy that in a containerized type format means we can integrate a lot easier into CI/CD pipelines, right? So we can be there when the testing's occurring, when a new feature or functionality is released, and there's that CI/CD pipeline that's triggered by that commit. We can now have our security offering put in front of there, in front of the change in the API, and as the testing starts going through there, we can also take that opportunity to test the security controls. So so that's definitely where we see the security recommendations. I mentioned before the rate limits and contractual agreements around those. So having that all configurable closer to the API, closer to the application, we're seeing a lot of feedback, a lot of resonation from those different customers we talk to.
Oh, good. So we got 26 more questions?
Only 26. Well, wow. I think we're almost out of time. So maybe we should just look at a demo or 26 questions. You know what? Maybe I'll jump to a question real quick, and you can reconsider that 26 additional questions. With all the learnings and the challenges we've mentioned, we know we've covered the customer insights, feedback we get, our own challenges around developing and designing API management solutions. We know that with all that detail and great feedback, we decided to rebuild our API management solution to, of course, meet those customer demands, those customer requirements, technical challenges. And we are transitioning, we have transitioned our Nginx controller product line to something much more modern and based on that customer feedback and Nginx new Nginx management suite. Can you cover a bit about what was done differently and how this meets our customer use cases a bit better?
Yeah, sure. So I do see a lot of questions asking for, the difference with different competitors, different platforms. So Nginx, the API Connectivity Manager is an evolution of our controller product. Right now, it's now offered as part of the Nginx Management Suite. As I mentioned maybe a few minutes, a few slides ago, we did take all of that feedback and try to make the platform as light as possible, as simple and operationally less challenging as possible. So, you will see a lot of improvements in that area. So the platform itself is, easy to operate, less complex than what the previous platform was. And I mentioned about our challenges around, passing on that complexity to our customers with regards to the onboarding experience. So we have taken that API, we've revisited that, and what we have is an API first product, API-driven and API-first product, where it's optimized, for the two main personas that we think that most often use this. One is managing the infrastructure piece, such as the gateways and the portals, and the other is managing the lifecycle of APIs. They're fully declarative in nature, in that all the complexity we have absorbed it. So the API is intuitive, it's easy to understand, and you can automate all of your onboarding to publishing tasks from the CI/CD, and all in one declarative API, right? So that takes the challenges we faced earlier away. So, and then we've gone with a policy approach, right? Wherein the framework or the base is light, and everything that you want to do, so to give those teams the capability to manage the lifecycle, manage the policies, or apply quality of service on their APIs. We've gone with the policy approach, wherein as the infrastructure person who is responsible for maintaining the infrastructure, they care about things like setting up the infrastructure, applying global settings like the standard response formats or standard log formats. So this is enforced at the enterprise level, right? So all the teams that will onboard their APIs onto the platform, they have this applied across the board, so they're in compliance with what has been set as standard. And and security teams may decide they want MTLS, and they can set up a mutual TLS end to end. And so that's at the infrastructure or at the global level, right? So for all the teams to follow, and at the team level, right, all these different API teams, as they onboard their APIs, as they manage the lifecycle of those APIs, they have about today we have about 20 plus policies that range from different functionality, a lot of authentication, authorization, access management type policies, to security policies that we talked about earlier, managing the request headers, setting those request body sizes, cores, proxy, enabling cache, all of those things that are heart of what Nginx can do is exposed as policies, right? So it's easier for teams to apply quality of service on their APIs as they choose and see fit. So all of this in that easy policy framework that easier to adopt, change, and evolve as the teams evolve their APIs. And the product also has full support for a developer portal where you can publish your documentation and enable self-service via resource credential management, right? So developers can be onboarded, easy integration with, it supports OpenID Connect, so you can integrate with an IDP of choice. So the developers are logging into the portal, and once they log into the portal, they're able to manage resource credentials and also test the APIs on the portal. And soon we will have the WAF and the layer 7 capabilities with WAF and security monitoring. So along with the rest of the 20 plus policies, WAF will also be available as part of the API connectivity manager.
Wow. All right. Cool. All right. Well, sounds exciting. I'll just mention, though, I did mention this is a 4-part series. We'll have another 3 episodes here coming out probably after Microservices March completes. But we will dig in deeper into each of these features that Veena mentioned as around configuration, automation, and security. So I did mention a demo. We are getting around to that time. I'd just take a second to look at the Q&A. If we have any questions here. I did see a lot of chat going on. Really appreciate all the comments. And I can see Sneaky Andrew has been answering a lot of the questions already. Thanks, Andrew. Oh, and Marco. But yeah, if Marco, you have any other questions, maybe we could field live before I jump into the demo.
Yeah, so API monetization is one of very common asks we get from our customers. So they're not looking for a full-fledged, ability to bill and things like that. But like as you have mentioned here, right, giving them enough metrics so they can take that metrics and make those decisions. We are looking at that, being able to do that with the ACM. So we're definitely looking at offering some kind of support there to support monetization, and this is on our radar and our roadmap.
So would an example of that be like a syslog message, like an access message, and then a separate system kind of pulling that message apart to see who the user is authenticated, what they accessed, and then you could bill based on that? Is that kind of an idea around?
Yeah, something like that, where we can get metrics on the usage per user basis based on either the user or the application that's making those API calls, and give enough information so they can make the they can take it out of the system and handle it somewhere else on how they want to do the monetization.
Okay, cool. All right. I'm just had to look through the chat here. It's great to see all the interaction. I do see a couple mentions of other vendors' products in there. I'll just say, Nginx open source is really the heart of our company, and its performance and stability is so good that a lot of other companies use it as the basis of their offerings. So that really just speaks to the value that the Nginx product can provide us. So I just touch on that real quick. And now we'll just jump into a quick little demo. So as I mentioned, we do have a few more episodes, 3 more episodes where we'll dig into a bit of this, but I just wanted to highlight our Nginx management suite. So as Veena mentioned, Nginx management suite is our rebranded, redesigned control plane solution for Nginx open source and Nginx Plus instances. So with our rebrand here, of course, I'm in dark mode. There also is the other mode that you can use. But this is the launch pad for Nginx Management Suite. One of the things, that Veena touched on was being able to make Management Suite more modular. So you can see in this case, I've got the Instance Manager module and the API Connectivity Manager installed. But there are a few additional modules that we can add on here based on the use cases you're using your data plane, Nginx Plus or Nginx Open Source, in your environment. So I just want to dig through a couple of highlights. So if we jump into settings real quick, I just wanted to touch on the RBAC type controls, roles you can configure in there, options you have to go and lock down access to your particular environment. So that is that RBAC I mentioned being very popular with the customers we speak to, very configurable. I'll also just touch on, if we just jump into Instance Manager, great way to configure fleets of Nginx instances. So whether that's open source or plus, we're able to manage both of them. You can go in and see your instances. You can go in and make some configuration changes. So you can see that Nginx.conf you may be familiar with. A nice interface to make those changes, publish them out to your Nginx instances. As the banner here on this one mentions, instances can be part of an instance group where you can send configuration to an instance group and have that configuration proliferated across a fleet of Nginx instances. You can stage your configurations for your change windows, scan for instances you may not be aware of. So amazing how many times we go to a customer and they say, every developer in our environment has deployed at least one Nginx open source instance. Some of them have rolled into production. Some of them are just dev test. Can you help us find them? And this scan feature is the answer for that. We can help you with managing your certificates and keys. And one of the newer features we have here are the ability to configure and pre-compile your WAF policies, your Nginx App Protect policies. So some really great features and offerings there in Instance Manager. But of course, today, the star is API Connectivity Manager. So this is a complete rewrite of that Nginx Controller API management solution. And as Veena mentioned, there's been a lot of work done to really fit this into those persona challenges, those security challenges, that API sprawl, business as usual, day-to-day management and APIs. And so as we jump into the API Connectivity Manager, we can see here on the side, we've got the 2 areas that we really focus on around the personas that are going to configure these environments. So if we look at the infrastructure tab here, we can see that we are presented with our workspace offering. So workspace is a way of segregating out our APIs. And as we jump into workspaces, we have environments, which means that you may have a banking API where people can go and query the status of loans. And you might have an environment where there's a dev, a test, a production, and you're able to break it out in these environment sections, right? So if we jump into the environments from the infrastructure side, right? An infrastructure team really wants to deploy those gateways, get them deployed for APIs to be deployed on them. So what you can see here are clusters of those API gateways, right? They can be deployed for specific environments, but this is where we identify where those APIs are going to be deployed to. We also identify those dev portals, right? So where your documentation is going to be deployed to. And we have an option as well as if you want internal dev portal documentation. So the infrastructure team would dig into those. And then if we just look here at the individual cluster, we'll look at the API one. You can see that infrastructure team has the ability to assign policies. So not only do they define the ports and the URLs that could be deployed, but they can also deploy the global policies that we see here. So if there's a corporate standard for, say, error response formats or log formats, proxy response headers, we can now go in and say, okay, infrastructure team have defined corporate standards that all the APIs need to adhere to, and then deploy those policies as see fit. But as technology changes, as requirements change within businesses, it's real easy for the infrastructure team to come in and say, you know what, I need to change the response error messages. It's a real easy way for them to go in, make one change, and have it be reflected across all the APIs in an environment, which, as we touched on, API sprawl can be quite significant. So for them to be able to go in and make a change to the logging message that's received for every API request, right? We did have that question around metrics. So being able to say, okay, monetization is important for these APIs now. I need to have the usernames included in every access log message that's sent out to them. So you'll be able to do that with the global policies. So if we jump onto the flip side of that, right, we jump into the services tab here, right? Now the services tab would be more focused for those API developers. And you can see we jump in here, we start again with those workspaces. And as we dig into those workspaces, we also are able to push configuration down to those particular environments, right? So that dev test environments. But what we see and what we focus on from a developer point of view is the ability for them to define, the API endpoints, the parameters, the queries, everything that's available in their API through an open API spec, right? So we can see our example. We've got two versions of the open API spec. If we jump in, two versions of the API. If we go in and edit, we can see that we've got all the details that would be specific to what the developer would be interested in and what the developer wanted to interact with. And we can see as we jump in and we see all the standard stuff, what API to deploy, the proxy's host name, ingress details around any base paths or versions of the API. We can also define our upstreams. So these would be our workloads where the actual API application resides. So we can define those. But what I want to highlight here, and one of the real power points of API Connectivity Manager is, again, this policy, this idea around policies. So we can see here that we have the global policies defined at the beginning when we're deploying our infrastructure to keep those corporate standards. But we also have quite a few policies that the development teams might want to interact with, right? So we can see here is an example of our CURs, right? CURs, I say that wrong. But being able to go in and edit that policy for that cross-origin resource sharing type deals to see what methods are allowed, what origins can access different resources, so that as the developer, the API owner is deploying this across different web applications, allowing different owners or different users to consume it, they can come in and make the changes they needed to ensure success in their APIs. So if we go back here, we can also see like OAuth 2 introspection, right? So being able to go in and define, OAuth can be quite complex. So a team coming in, define this policy one time means that the API developer, even the infrastructure team, can now apply this policy, and you've got OAuth configured in front of your API, right? The API developer's not concerned with the authentication, but maybe the security team can come in and apply that. And next year when there's a new OAuth spec, a new OAuth version, it's just a simple matter of updating the policy for that version and can be deployed across your fleet. So like I said, future episodes, we'll dig in a bit deeper around these features and functionality. So we hope to see you on those coming episodes. All right.
Great.
So I think right at the top.
Great demo there, Mike. And just wanted to highlight a couple of, you talked a lot about the policies, a couple of performance-related policies in there, such as, if you wanted to take Nginx Plus, as known for its active health checks, when it can actively check the backend service, take it out of rotation, and bring it back in when it comes back up. So all of that can configured as policies, increases the performance. Anything that you want to load balance, if you had more than one API service that you want to load balance, and choose the best algorithm for your service, You can do that with the a backend configuration policy where you set those load balancing algorithms, check the connection settings that you want the gateway to follow, and things like that. A lot of tweaks there that you can optimize the performance for. And one other policy is, you want to limit, you may want to give access to the get method, but restrict access to the put and the post methods. So there's that HTTP level access control as well. So, a lot of different, each team gets to own what they want to do with those policies. So there is that, autonomy for each of the teams developing these APIs.
Excellent. Well, cool. It looks like we're at the end of our hour streaming presentation. We appreciate you joining and appreciate all the comments and feedback that you guys have provided. And we're looking forward to seeing you again in April for our next episode. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone.